I'm Dean Adams. I'm a principal at Merton-Adams, but prior to doing that, I ran brand management at 3M for about 15 years. But I had a mission. I was talking to some folks before the presentation, and I mentioned that I was a physicist by training. So I have sort of an analytical background, but I actually have an MBA, and so I'm a recovering physicist. But I do have a healthy respect for data, and in fact, I haven't seen Sean Larson yet this morning. Hopefully he's here someplace, but he and I worked together while I was at 3M, and I'm going to share some insights that we had while we were there in terms of how to deal with brands. Now, brand management, marketing analytics, best friends forever. One of the things I discovered when I got into 3M and brand management was that it was actually much more measurable and quantitative than I ever imagined. I came out of a line division. We were very focused on the P&L, launching new products all the time. And here I was in a corporate job in brand management. I thought this was a fluffy topic. It was communications and advertising, and I was going to spend a couple years doing this, and then I'd get back into the real world, back in business management. And then I discovered that brands were corporate assets, and they actually had some value. And in fact, along the way, we found out that the brand might be the single largest asset. Now, I know there's a few people here from Medtronic and Target and others, and I've got some brand values for those brands. You probably all know those already, but we're way bigger than what we thought. Instead of being measured in hundreds of millions of dollars, they're measured in billions of dollars. And that was an insight that we didn't really understand at the time until we started seeing some of these numbers popping up in the press. Second thing we found out was that companies with high brand loyalty sell more stuff and can charge more for it. Again, kind of a new thought 20 years ago. Not so much new to people that were in the field and selling or people that were close to the customers, but the fact that you could measure this in a way and then drive the business was the new idea. And then finally, when we got into brand management, we realized that brand management wasn't just a subset of marketing or even a subset of communications. Brand management was business management. I did run into another physicist was in brand management. He was the CMO of Intel, a company you might have heard of, and Mr. Carter, a friend of mine, invented the Intel Inside campaign. And part of the reason they did that was he and Andy Grove were trying to fend off AMD when they copied the 386 trademark, or lack of trademark. They thought it was a trademark, couldn't have it, and so they created Intel Inside. So brand management really is business management. So lots of acronyms today, and I come out of a world where there were lots of acronyms, and we use them all the time. My favorite one is SPG, Sustainable Profitable Growth. If you focus on that, things tend to go better. And what I found when I went to talk to people about brand management in businesses, if we talked about brand loyalty and customer satisfaction and so forth, sometimes the CEO or the general manager of the business would kind of lose interest. They would say, okay, great, but when are you going to get to the real stuff? You could hear them thinking that, almost. But if we said, we're here to help you with sustainable, profitable growth, and our whole mission is to help you grow your business, they were all ears. And so one of the questions that I was thinking about in getting ready for this was a question that I had gotten from several of you that I talked about in terms of what are the issues that you face, and was thinking, I'm going to back up for a sec, was how do you get people interested in analytics? And we'll come back to that thought. So if brands are your largest corporate asset, how big are they? Here's a few companies. I was surprised that at 3M, the brand portfolio, not just the 3M brand, but the brand portfolio was about 30% of the total capitalization of the company. That was an astounding thought when we put that number together. We actually built the models to calculate it and calculated those values and came up with a pretty big number. The Scotch brand is probably north of $3 billion itself, and posted is probably close to 2 today. Big numbers. You get a lot of respect. There's probably not very many factories in the world that cost more than that. So if you had a leaky roof on a factory, you'd probably fix it. If you have a leak in your brand, would you pay attention? You would if you think it's worth $3 billion. And it's interesting if you think about some of the brands in the company. Do people here talk about the value of their brands? Has anybody ever raised that in their company? How about the Medtronic guys or the Target? I know there's a few of you out there. Not seeing too many heads moving, you know. Well, we're going to make some connections to those numbers and might be able to give you some leverage. I'm sorry, I'm one slide off up here. I'm looking, there's this great screen on the Apple, and it's got a little bitty slide here, and I was looking at that, and you're looking at the other one. So, one of the things that we had to deal with at 3M was that we had about 1,500 registered trademarks when I started, 18,000 registrations globally, and we were spending a lot of money on it. Now, we thought this was just a big cost, a big expense. But what I didn't realize at the beginning was we were actually diverting resources from the important brands into these less important brands. If you think of every trademark in your business as a mouth to feed, and then you think of all the things that we've heard about even up to now, today, about how you optimize your website and build campaigns and so forth, each trademark is fighting for those resources. It's another mouth to feed. So the more you have, the more fragmented your resources get. Unilever figured that out a while back, and they were trying to cut their trademarks by 75% down to about 400 major brands from about 1,500. Now, I was astounded when I saw that they have 135,000 trademarks. That's a huge number on a global basis, but to think about that, that's really a gigantic amount. And if you think about this, just to put this in perspective, to register a trademark costs about $500. It's good for 10 years. There's 40 trademark categories for each brand that you can have, and if you are competing in multiple categories, you register it in multiple categories, so it could go up. That's $500 on average per country. If you operate in 60 or 70 countries, that can be a big number. We were in we had subsidiaries in 75 countries, we operated in 150. So now you can spend a lot of money on registrations. The annual cost just for registrations can be $10 million. That's a pretty big amount of money if it isn't paying off in terms of results. P&G is cutting their brands down as well. They have 23 or so billion-dollar brands, but they're trying to reduce that number again. And just think about that, 23 billion-dollar brands, that's pretty amazing. So if you have a brand, what is it? Well, a brand is an idea that's in the mind of the customer. A trademark is something that you own. It's how you own a corporate asset, the trademark. But it isn't worth anything until it's in the mind of the customer. And the idea that you want in the mind of the customer is a promise. It's not just the brand, it's the promise that stands behind the brand. Now let's do a little test here. How many of you have shopped at Nordstrom's? Okay. How many of you have ever gone to Walmart? Okay. Now think of the brand promise of the two brands. How many of them think they're the same? They're different, right? Now think about how they're different in your mind. And you don't have to answer, but let's just go through the list here and see if I hit on any of them. They have difference in decor. They have difference in selection, difference in prices, difference in return policies, difference in store clerks, difference in pricing. How much of that thought in your mind came from the advertising they did versus all those other things? My guess is it was probably a small portion, maybe not a big thing. There's a whole lot of things around that experience that forms the impression in your mind of that brand promise. So if you think about a brand, it's that. And when you have a lot of people with a positive image in their mind of your brand promise, your brand is worth a lot. If you don't have anyone, it's just a trademark. So a trademark turns into a brand when you have a lot of people aware of your brand and they have a positive impression in your mind. So now you're in a corporate world, you've got 1,500 registered trademarks, and you have to go and tell some proud brand managers that your trademark has no value. In fact, it's not a brand, it's a trademark. It's really kind of useless. How do you do that? Has anybody had to deliver any bad news from your analytics? Nobody? Few nods, okay. So how you do it? Well, we did it with some trepidation, but we did it with some data. We thought if we had some data, maybe we could make an argument. And so we started pulling data together. Well, it took us a little while to collect the sales by trademark data, like about 4 years, because 3M had a lot of business units, a lot of SKUs. It was an immense database just to get that. It took a long time. We also had to bring in the trademark registration database. We had to bring in the catalogs. There were quite a few of different elements. Finance was involved, IT was involved, manufacturing was involved, and we were able to build a little chart. And so I think you heard from a couple people earlier, how do you do it so that it's simple? CEOs can manage simple things, maybe 3 thoughts and then you're done. Would be kind of the way that people talk about them, but it's practical. You know, if you can get it down to 3 things, they can remember it, and it would be good. And so we created a chart that looked like that. And if you were an investing person and you said, you know, maybe 50 or 60 trademarks account for 90% of your sales, what would you do with the other 1,400? You might say, well, maybe we don't really need them. So the people in that long tail started seeing pressure to eliminate their trademarks. And we actually managed to get it down to around 800 over some time, which was a big improvement. Now, when you have companies that are doing acquisitions, you wind up, usually an acquisition can bring in 50 to 100 trademarks at a crack. So you start the process all over again. But if you try and do this without having some data behind you, you're ready for a fist fight. You know, the product managers and the brand managers are not happy when you come in and tell them that their baby's ugly. So get some data, and I'm a strong believer in that. Now, this is all internal stuff, so now we're just selling the internal politics. But that doesn't drive sustainable, profitable growth. It just reduces some cost for us. But let's talk about how you get to the growth side. If you have to connect the dots, which dots are you trying to connect? One of the things that intrigued me was when we started looking at loyalty, we found that loyalty correlated to all kinds of things. If we measured loyalty, we could predict share of customer. And so if we could increase the customer loyalty, we could increase the share of customer. That seemed like a logical thing, but we could actually build the algorithm and see how much it would go up. If we looked at price sensitivity, if you increase loyalty, you could reduce price sensitivity, and you could actually decrease the defection rate as well with loyalty. So now we said, well, this is a great measure. Now, why did we even do that? For some of you, well, it looks like most of you are a little younger than I am, which is good for you, and it makes me feel good to be here, I guess, with you. But back in the 80s, we did a lot of work on customer satisfaction. And we thought that if you had high satisfaction scores, you were doing really great. And so we were measuring satisfaction, and we were getting scores between 90 and 95%. And when you get scores of 90 and 95%, you feel really, really good, and it's hard to get anybody to change anything. They're saying, well, why bother? Let's go to work on something else because our satisfaction scores are so high, we can't make them go up another 1%. So we had to make the test tougher. So we created a loyalty index, and we used the Xerox approach and basically came down to satisfaction, repurchase, and recommend, and you had to get a top score on all those. And that took the scores from 95 down to about 30. Now we had lots of room for improvement, and we could say that you're not doing very well. Let's get those numbers down and move up your position in the marketplace by raising loyalty. So we did that. But one of the things we found was that when we wanted to move those numbers, we had to break it down into the things that mattered. And so we looked at share of customer, but then we started looking at customer engagement. And one of the things that surprised us was just how much we could move it by how they reacted to employees. And we see this over and over again with our business today, that the better the customer relationship is with employees of all kinds, the better the loyalty. So you can probably think about that and the experiences you have just when you call in on some customer service line. And I had that experience earlier this week. I called Apple, and I had a little problem with my new Mac, and doggone if these guys didn't figure it out. And it must have taken them about 2 hours on the phone. And I was curious as to how long they would last before they might quit or get crabby. And it turned out I was lucky, and I got a good team. My partner, business partner, called Google and actually managed to get them to get angry. So I don't know if it was just my partner or if it was the agent, but it wasn't as consistent as maybe I would have guessed, but they've improved. They were good for me. Now, I have the distinct pleasure of getting able to use the government services more than I used to. And one of the services is called Medicare. Now, this is something that you get to when you get to a certain age. And I have to say that their systems are not as good as Apple, as near as I can tell. And so there is some opportunities for improvement. But that customer experience is very much impacted by how the individuals do it. It can come through in the emails as well. If you get an email that's very personal, it makes a difference, or you can tell that they're actually talking to you as opposed to a computer-generated one. Well, you focus on the customer experience, that's great, but how do you get it down to the very finite? And what we found was sometimes it gets down to the billing department. How well does the billing department do their job? If they get it done quickly and they get it done accurately, it can change the customer's perceptions and can actually move customer loyalty. We managed to build those models, and it went all the way from one end of this, from employee alignment, to the other end, to the P&L, which is a little bit fuzzy there, but it's looking at the profitability by customer. The levers that we pulled were pretty straightforward. We focused on things that made a brand different and made it relevant. And that drove our brand promise, familiarity, perceived value, availability, price, purchase, and then loyalty. Availability just means it's on the shelf. You know, you can buy it. Price is just what it is. It can be the total delivered cost, but it's basically the price. Familiarity was one that I found quite different. It's more than awareness. And to keep it simple, there's all kinds of metrics that you can talk about in terms of awareness and familiarity, or other scores around passion or engagement. But the idea is, if I'm aware of the brand, I've heard of it. If I'm familiar with the brand, I know something about it so that I can buy it. And the story I like to tell is about when I was trying to explain this to my 14-year-old son, and I was explaining about how IBM was going through this, and he said, "Dad, you're making this way too complicated." I said, "Well, how would you do it if you're so smart?" And every 14-year-old is smarter than their parents, so I figured I'd give him a chance. And he said, "Well, Dad, have you ever heard of Snoop Doggy Dogg?" This is before he was Snoop Dogg, right? So I said, "Well, yes." And he said, "Well, what kind of music does he play?" I said, "Well, he plays rock." He said, "No, Dad, he plays rap. You're aware but not familiar. You wouldn't know which aisle to go down in the store to buy his DVD." And I said, "Okay, point taken." He was right. And that's the difference. If you want people to be familiar so they know enough about your brand to be able to buy it. And it turns out familiarity correlates like crazy to purchase intent. As it goes up, your purchase intent goes up. And it's not a yes, no, it's a continuum. It goes from a little bit of familiarity to a lot. So, you can control almost all of those boxes on the screen, the ones in green. Perceived value is the idea in the mind of the customer. They get to do the perceiving, we don't. So if they perceive it to be high, great. But if we perceive it to be high, it doesn't matter. And then it's their loyalty, not ours. But one of the boxes that has always intrigued me, and I think about sales funnels and so forth, you know, we try and get people aware and familiar and get them into the preference and trial and so forth. And then they get to purchase, and it's one little bitty word, purchase. And this is the word that, you know, it just sort of happens. And it kind of is a symptom to me of marketing and sales not necessarily being tightly connected. In fact, I don't know, has anybody ever had a problem with their marketing department and sales department not talking to each other very well? You know, does that happen? Never, right? Okay. Well, it turns out there's some data about this, and being a guy who likes to measure loyalty, what we found, and this data has been published now, you can see this on the web, is that about half of the purchase experience, or half of the loyalty is driven by the purchase experience. And the purchase experience happens where? With the salesperson, on the sales floor, on the phone, someplace where people are actually interacting probably with a live person. So what happens if that salesperson is not doing what you want them to do, or if the process is not connected? And we spend a lot of time today working on making sure that the sales process is defined and that the organization is connected together. It's not enough to just have everything leading up to that preference and then have the sales process fall apart because the sales organization doesn't know what to do with it. Now, my partner Tom Ryan is an expert in sales management and actually maps out the whole sales process. And if you have it mapped out, you can start to build tools around the delivery of the sales process. You can put in place the materials and you can train people on how to do it. You can also train the marketing department on what is the sales process that they're actually trying to support. So, some more data. Here's two guys. I'm a baseball fan. And they both got to kind of high records in home runs, but probably a little different way. One guy did it maybe a more admirable way than the other. And I'll let you decide which, but how you get there matters. And so thinking about the way to do it will matter, and we'll keep coming back to that thought. One thing that surprised me when I was thinking about that thought of the purchase experience, and this was prior to talking to Tom, goes back a number of years, we looked at this data and we found that one of our competitors, this is actually in another country, was beating us on customer loyalty. This was a little bitty company in Brazil, and they were going up against a couple major global brands, and they actually were doing 20% better on customer share than we were. And we thought, how can that be? What are they doing? We'd gone out and asked the customers, we'd gone and surveyed them and said, how often do you want to see a sales rep? And they said, once a month. How often are you seeing a sales rep? And they said, once a month. We said, we're meeting expectations, not a problem. And then we said, well, how often are you seeing the other guy's sales rep? Twice a month. Oh, well, they must have been having a little different experience because they were buying more from the other guy. They were showing up more often, they were paying more attention to their customer. If we just did what our data said and met the expectation of the customer, we were underperforming. But it showed up in the sales data, and you can see it in that. The sales data shows in the right chart. Their performance in terms of the number of calls shows it in the left chart. Seems simple, just a little thing. But here's where the data is showing, okay, it gets down to the execution. Another thing we found, how you do it, speed matters. This is data that TARP has collected as well as others, and if you call somebody up with a problem and you solve it right away, they generally are satisfied. If it takes maybe a day, that satisfaction tails off, and the longer it goes, the further it tails off. That chart probably should be measured in minutes or seconds, not in hours and days. So speed matters. Sometimes it's not so much that you have to solve the problem, you just have to tell them, I heard you, and I'm going to get back to you in 24 hours, and you manage the expectation. A lot of companies now are getting that on their tech service. If you call into their support line or you write into their support line, you instantly get back an email that says it's going to take a day, an hour, some time. I like Apple. I call Apple, and they give me the option. They said, well, the wait time is 5 minutes, or we can call you back. I think that's pretty clever because they're managing your expectation. And if they call you back in 5 minutes, or if they call you back in 3, you think they've done even better. And one more chart with data, and it's a little clipped on the right side, but it's still the same trends there. We looked at people that complained versus people that didn't. And if you actually look at these numbers, it's not too bad. We've got 76% of the people never had a problem. And so 65% of them are definitely going to repurchase. That's not bad from a loyalty standpoint for those people. But what about the other 24%? And even more so, what about the people in the 76% that weren't completely satisfied or definitely going to repurchase? Turns out if you'd run the math on all those numbers, it's about 59% will repurchase across all those categories. But take a look at the numbers in green. People that had a problem and had their problem satisfied had higher numbers than the people that never had a problem. Does anybody know why that would be the case? Any guess? If you had a problem and somebody took care of it, how would you feel? Kind of quiet. You're being taken care of, right? You maybe feel like you could trust them a little bit, right? Nobody's perfect, and if they take care of me, I'm probably going to do work with them again because I know I know that they'll come through. Used to be when Dell Computer was bigger, I'd go into a group and say, how many people of you in the room have a Dell Computer? And a whole bunch of hands would go up, and I'd say, how many people, and it depended on the month, because it varied from month to month, how many people had a display that blew up? And a bunch of hands would go up, and then I'd say, how many people are going to rebuy from Dell? And the same hands would go back up. And then I'd say, well, why? Well, the computer monitor blew up, but they got me a new one the next day. And so they took care of me. And they were really loyal to Dell because the service was just terrific. Even though their hard drives were failing and the monitors were conking out or they had other problems, they had just terrific service. And so they said, well, I've got to stick with them because they just take care of me. Amazing, right? So the answer isn't create little problems and solve them quickly. That's not the solution here. But being able to be fast and take care of the customers matters. Now, the other numbers on there can be a little bit frightening. If you just mollify a customer, they can become a little bit of a terrorist. If you antagonize the customer, they really become a terrorist. But the other one at the bottom is 16% of the people didn't complain at all. They just don't tell you. It turns out a complaint is a compliment. So if you think about people complaining as a compliment, that's a good thing. They're asking you to help solve their problem. And I have to share a story because, again, my partner, who's a much better sales guy than I am, we were talking about sales calls. And customers, were getting called by these reps. And the sales reps were counting all the times they're out selling stuff, but when they went for a service call, they didn't count it. And why? Well, they weren't selling anything. So it was a service call, not a sales call. And Tom said, well, if you solve their problem, why don't you ask them to buy something? You've just helped them. They're probably more inclined to buy from you then than if you hadn't. And it's a change in paradigm thinking about that. But it all goes back to that changing that purchase experience and how you're managing that customer relationship. Again, with data, you can see this, but you also have to think about the execution and build that communication across the functions. We spent a lot of time working with management to make sure that the first line managers are trained in the process and understand what to do with the data. When you're talking with your management and you're thinking about what you're doing, do they know how to use it? It works going up, it also works going down. The tools in big data and marketing analytics today are so much more powerful than anything I experienced 20 years ago. It's amazing to me, just absolutely amazing. But a lot of people don't know what to do with it. And so making it simple and showing them, here's how you use it, and here's what you can decide from it is important. It's part of that making the information valuable. And if you can connect that information to sustainable, profitable growth, it's great. I'm going to stop here, and I think we might have a chance for a question or two. Or not.